Ask and you shall receive. The college football playoff is giving us a rematch of one of the greatest games of 2024. And in this new age and new era of college football, these are two Big Ten foes. In the old age of college football, well, tradition still speaks volumes. This is an old school Big Ten versus Pac-12 showdown in Pasadena in the Rose Bowl. I couldn't really ask for a better setting for a better rematch. Ohio State and Oregon. They will go toe-to-toe for the second time this year after the instant classic in Eugene earlier this season. And while Oregon is looking to continue as college football's lone unbeaten and get their first national championship, the Buckeyes are coming off a dominating performance against Tennessee, and they have revenge on their mind. We'll tell you everything you need to know about the Bucks and Ducks here in just a little bit. What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel, and welcome to College Football Playoff Quarterfinal predictions. We already got the Fiesta Bowl. We already got the Peach Bowl. We're on to the Rose Bowl, and we still have one more game after that in the Sugar Bowl to predict. And if you want to hear everything that's going on with the College Football Playoff, you want to hear my thoughts, and you're as big of a college football nerd as I am, please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and support this channel in any way you can. If it's simply just kicking back, relaxing, open up a beverage of your choice and watching this video, I greatly appreciate that. If you want to like, comment, share, and anything else to interact with the channel, you're helping to support it. And if you want to support me outside of YouTube, go give me a follow on Twitter or Instagram. It's at TailgateNate29, and you can see some of the other stuff that I do in the sports media realm, such as covering games, calling games, writing articles, and much more as a sports media student. Greatly appreciate however you're willing to support me. Okay, this is the one everyone has been waiting for, right? The Bucks and the Ducks. Ohio State was 9-0 against Oregon until the previous two meetings. Oregon beat them in Columbus in 2021, and they beat them in Eugene this year in what was an absolute instant classic. No one held a lead bigger than 8 points, and it went back and forth, 7 lead changes. It just had that college football playoff feel and the Will Howard slide. And the Dan Lanning coaching scheme and the play calling, that's what gets remembered from this game. I'll tell you what has been forgotten from this game as we go along here, but I mean, man, I could break that game down for the next 30 minutes and not get bored. It was an incredible game, an incredible environment. We get these two teams in the Rose Bowl game on a neutral field, rematching each other, and it is for the right to continue the quest to go win a national championship. How do we do preview predictions here on the channel? Well, we're going to do some keys to the game and tell you some keys to the game when each team possesses the football. So we are going to look at this Ohio State offense against this Oregon defense, and then we'll take a look at the Duck offense versus the Bucks defense at the end of the video. We'll go through some final keys to the game. I'll break this one down, tell you how I think it's going to play out, as well as give you a winner for who I think will move on in the college football playoff and will be named champions of the Rose Bowl. I'm not going to waste any more time, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive on in to talking about this Ohio State offense. And let me tell you what they did in the game in Eugene back on October 12th. 467 yards. Will Howard, 326 yards. 28 of 35, went 9.3 yards per pass. And just absolutely lit up this Oregon defense. Will Howard was absolutely dealing in that game. That gets forgotten because of the play he made at the end of the game, the slide with no time left, thought there was time left, lost control of the clock, and it's what everyone points to and says, man, Will Howard really cost them that game when he played exceptionally well throughout that game. Now, the running back duo for the Buckeyes, Quinshon Judkins, did not run that well in that game. Travion Henderson did. Judkins had 11 carries for only 23 yards, but did get into the end zone for a touchdown. Henderson, he had 10 carries for 87 yards, was running a whole lot better. As a whole, the Buckeye team averaged 4.3 yards per carry against this Oregon defense. And the wide receiver room, Emeka Egbuka, 10 catches, 93 yards and a touchdown. And the freshman Jeremiah Smith, 9 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown there in that game. The Buckeye offense was firing on all cylinders in the game on October 12th. But let me tell you what they did in the game against Tennessee, because you couldn't have asked for a better offensive performance. Again, Will Howard has only thrown for 300 yards twice. That game against Oregon and this game that just happened against Tennessee. 311 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have 1 pick, but it was a tip drill kind of thing. Probably should have been PI. Won't go into it in depth there. Jeremiah Smith, 6 catches, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns. Emeka Egbuka had 5 catches for over 80 yards. Travion Henderson got involved in the pass game. G. Scott was making some really big catches. And they got guys like Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, and so many other talented weapons in this wide receiver room. As far as running the football, Henderson and Judkins both had a pair of touchdowns in that game. And this offensive line, that was the big concern for Ohio State entering that game, especially playing a defensive lineman as talented as James Pierce. Didn't seem to matter. This Buckeye offensive front was great at being able to limit pressure. It was phenomenal at being able to open holes for the running backs to run through, but Will Howard showed out. This Buckeye offense showed out. It showed out in the game in the previous meeting against Oregon. It showed out in the game against Tennessee. Well, when you take a look at this Oregon defense, you take that Ohio State game out, you take that Penn State game out. So for the most part this year, this is an Oregon defense that has been really, really stout. And you go back and you look at that previous meeting against Oregon, well, Oregon was able to provide pressure. That's something Ohio State's defense wasn't able to do, and we'll talk about that later. Oregon, 1 sack, 3 tackles for loss in the game. I know, like Nate, that's not a whole ton of pressure, but they were able to affect the game a lot more than Ohio State was, which is why Oregon, I should say it was one of the reasons why Oregon was able to go there and win that game. But this is a defense that has been pretty darn good, and it can generate pressure back to the quarterbacks. It's got 40 sacks on the season. It's a really, really good pass rushing team, and it does the fundamental things well. I feel like I've said that about every good defense that I've talked about here in the previous 2 videos, but that's just what a good defense does. It does the fundamental things well. Ohio State has shown that Oregon can be beaten. Penn State has shown that Oregon can be beaten. This is still a vulnerable Duck defense, but when it gets pressure, when it gets teams behind the line, and when it forces turnovers, that's where this Oregon defense gets really, really special and gets really, really dynamic. Now, first key to the game here, the dynamic Ohio State attack that we've seen against Oregon, that we have seen at points throughout this season, that we saw against Tennessee, has got to show back up here. That means Will Howard, you've got to be on your A game. You've got to be dealing on a level that you were against Tennessee, if not a little bit more, which is crazy to say because in that game against Tennessee, I think Will Howard had a 95, 96, 97, 98 QBR. Yeah, it was a really, really good day at the office for Will Howard. He's got to be able to come in and play with that kind of consistency and that kind of level. He's got to bring the best version of Will Howard to Pasadena, and you might have to target Jeremiah Smith 10 times. You might have to target Emeka Egbuka 10 times. Again, Egbuka 10 catches in the last game against Oregon. Jeremiah Smith had 9. I would look for that to be a pretty similar case against this Oregon team this second time around for this Ohio State offense. Now, let's talk about the offensive front. Because, yes, Tennessee is good. You really only have to watch out. And look, I'm not saying the Tennessee defensive front is not good. It's been one of the best defensive fronts all season long. But you really only have to watch out for one major weapon, and that is James Pierce. There are a ton of other really, really good players on that Tennessee defensive front. Oregon has got multiple really dangerous weapons. Maybe none as good as James Pierce, but they got a ton of guys that overall, I think Oregon's defensive front is better than what Tennessee does, especially from a pass rushing standpoint and maybe from a physicality standpoint as well. In this Buckeye offensive front, even though it looked good, Oregon is a different beast. And this is an Oregon team that's going to bring a whole lot of just switching guys and stunts and everything else. This is a Buckeye offensive front that is not the same since playing Oregon last. They don't have Josh Simmons. They don't have their center Seth McLaughlin. That didn't seem to matter against Tennessee. It might matter a whole lot, and it'll speak volumes against this Oregon team. The Buckeye offensive front cannot piece everything together and cannot play as well as they did against Tennessee. But you have to start wondering, what should the Buckeye game plan be? Because They were able to find some success on the ground against Oregon last time out, but when they have moved to the, all right, we're just going to try to out physicality you and we're not going to change that, that has led to a lot of problems. That mentality lost them the game against Michigan. It almost lost them a game against Nebraska earlier this season as well. I think Ohio State's got to do what they did in the first Oregon game. That's give Henderson his carries, give Judkins his carries, 10 to 15 carries per both of them, but you've got to target Jeremiah Smith. You've got to target Emeka Egbuka. You've got to target Carnell Tate, G. Scott in this wide receiver room, because that is where Ohio State, no matter who they play, they got the best group of pass catchers in the country and a quarterback that is pretty darn good at throwing the football as well. They have got to be able to use their matchup advantage on the outside. That is the biggest key for Ohio State in this game. They did it against Tennessee. They cannot change their game plan. I think they got to use a similar game plan here against Oregon. They got to be able to beat this Ducks secondary. Again, a lot easier said than done, but they were able to do it in the first meeting, and I think they're very capable of doing it here. Let's talk about this Oregon offense now, because we talked about Texas a little bit ago and how they, or I should say in a video previously, the video that came out right before this one, and how they just might be, pound for pound, one of, if not the best defense in the entire country. You could say the exact same thing about the Ohio State defense as well. Now, we didn't really see that on display the last time Ohio State played Oregon, and I'll talk more about that later, but let's talk about this Oregon offense first. Dillon Gabriel, he was a Heisman finalist and has been one of the best players in college football this season, and you could argue has been the best quarterback in college football this season. Let's take a look at Gabriel's stat line: 3,558 yards, has 28 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. After some early struggles with throwing picks, he really has not thrown that many in the later portion of this season, and I don't think he turned the ball over when these two schools last met back in Eugene again on October 12th. But this is a Dillon Gabriel-led offense that's got a ton of weapons, ton of dynamic weapons. Jordan James is a 1,250-yard back that is dynamic. You also got Noah Whittington back there that can run the football really well. So we talk about Henderson and Judkins for the Buckeyes. James and Whittington for the Ducks can be just as, if not a little bit, more dynamic. And Ohio State, you know the weapons they have out there. You got to know the weapons that Oregon has as well, because they can be as, if not more, dynamic. Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden, and the tight end Terrence Ferguson are all over 250 yards receiving on, or not over 250 yards, my apologies, over 500 yards on the season. I was looking at Ferguson's 520 yards and flipped the two numbers, whatever. All four of those guys, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden, Terrence Ferguson, over 500 yards receiving on the season. Much like Ohio State, where their matchup advantage is on the outside, spreading you out with passing the football. That's where Oregon's advantage lies as well, and it helps that both these teams have some pretty good tailbacks. But Oregon and Ohio State, both of their secondary struggled, especially this Ohio State secondary, because it led up big play after big play after big play. Because we talk about how good Will Howard looked, Dillon Gabriel looked every bit as good as a Heisman finalist in that game as well. 23 of 34, 341 yards, 2 touchdowns in that game against Ohio State. Jordan James ran for over 5 yards per pop, as did the entire Oregon team. Evan Stewart carved up Denzel Burke. Tez Johnson had a touchdown in there as well. Terrence Ferguson had a very, very nice, or I'd say had some very nice catches, including a 32-yarder. And Trayshawn Holden, before he got himself thrown out of that previous game against the Ohio State for spitting in the face of Davison Igbinosun, he had a catch for 32 yards as well. It was a Buckeye secondary that was getting absolutely torched. It was getting mossed. It just could not find a way to slow down this Oregon passing attack, and that could be a very similar story here. When you take a look at Oregon's offensive potential there as well, I think no game shines brighter than the Big Ten championship game against Penn State, because Oregon just was dealing from every facet. Gabriel, 280 yards and then some. 4 touchdowns in that game. Jordan James, Noah Whittington running really, really well. Tez Johnson had himself a great game, and we know that a lot of these other Oregon wide receivers can step up, have really good days as well. Again, the main weapon in that game against Penn State was Tez Johnson. He had over 180 receiving yards. When you talk about this Buckeye defense, there were two things that they couldn't do against Oregon the last time out. They could not get pressure, and they could not get pressure on Dylan Gabriel, and they could not defend outside the numbers. They were allowing too many big plays. The secondary was getting cooked. Both of those things have to turn around. Now, as far as the pressure thing goes, Jim Knowles did not bring a lot of blitzes in that game against Oregon. They brought a ton of blitzes against Tennessee, and it worked. And Tennessee was feeling the heat. They were feeling the pressure all game long. 4 sacks, 6 tackles for loss for this Buckeye defense. And the secondary, I mean, Oregon's probably got more dynamic weapons than Tennessee, but Dante Thornton, Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, Nico Iamaleava only had 104 passing yards, and granted, Dylan Sampson didn't play, so we couldn't really see kind of how the Buckeyes were able to defend that run game. That could be a very good story here to watch for. Very good thing to watch for in this Oregon game and see how well Ohio State's able to defend the run. The secondary didn't allow an inch, and a lot of those sacks were coverage sacks, and that the pressure didn't get there super fast, but it got there because the coverage downfield was so good. Yes, it's great to come away with coverage sacks, but that's when you saw Nico getting outside the pocket and running. I think he had almost as many, if not more, rushing yards than he did passing yards. Obviously, that's an exaggeration because of the sack yardage, but Nico scrambled, got outside of the pocket 20 times, even on some designed quarterback runs there as well. And both of Tennessee's touchdowns were scored by Nico on the ground. That brings you into my first key here, which is I believe that Dylan Gabriel, much like he was at points throughout the Ohio State game earlier this year, his legs have got to be a factor. I think they have got to be a huge difference in this game because you saw Ohio State struggle with it, not only in the game against Oregon, but let's just take a look at the last game they played. The one thing you probably ask Ohio State to do a little bit better in the game against Tennessee, which it's hard to find something, but there is, it's defending the quarterback run. Yeah, they got pressure back to Nico, but when he got outside of the pocket and run, not only is Nico athletic enough to make guys move, he just got into the open field where there was no Ohio State defender to be seen. They've got to do a better job of defending the quarterback run. You know Dylan Gabriel's going to hit his shots. You know Jordan James and Noah Whittington are going to rip off some runs. This Buckeye defense, keep Gabriel in the pocket, whether that's getting coverage sacks, not letting him get outside of the pocket, and extending plays with his legs. That is a huge key for this Buckeye defense. Now, the Buckeye defensive front, on top of that, on top of keeping Gabriel in that pocket, you have got to generate more pressure than you did on Dylan Gabriel. No sacks for the Buckeyes in that previous game against the Ducks. Again, you heard what they did against Tennessee. 4 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. And Jack Sawyer especially. The dude is playing with his hair on fire. That's got to continue in this game against Oregon. Now, the matchup to watch out for here as well. Again, I told you there were 2 things the Buckeye defense couldn't do. That was get pressure to Gabriel, and that was win the battle on the outside against this Oregon wide receiver room. If you want some optimism for a Buckeye fan, your secondary probably could not have played worse in the game against Oregon on October 12th, and if they play the way they did against Tennessee, it's already going to be better. But this Duck wide receiver room, I know Tennessee is very talented. It poses more threats, and it poses more talent and bigger just play ability than what Tennessee has shown us this year. Let's cut all of that out because normally in games like this, what I like to do is I like to go to the coach I trust more and the quarterback I trust more. And both of those are on the side of Oregon. I trust Dan Lanning more than Ryan Day. I trust Dylan Gabriel more than Will Howard. And again, that's not knocking Ryan Day and Will Howard. I think Ryan Day is a very good head coach, and I think Will Howard is a very good quarterback. I just think Dan Lanning is a better coach, and I think Dylan Gabriel is a better quarterback than what Ryan Day and Will Howard are. However, I'm not going to do that in this game, and maybe my bias is showing through a little bit because I do trust Oregon more in this game. I am going to bank that Ohio State is going to look as good as they did against Tennessee. And the question is, did Ohio State empty the tank against the Tennessee Volunteers? Did they put everything on the line because they had a chip on their shoulder after the Michigan loss? They played with their hair on fire and now they're spent? I don't think so. I don't think Ohio State was even close to emptying the tank against Oregon. They got up 21-0 like that, and they could already take their foot off the gas. They did in that second quarter. It allowed Tennessee to sort of get back in that game, and then they ramped it up in the third quarter, and they could play their backups for the majority of that fourth quarter. And I know people have been talking about rest. That's very important. Oregon's got the rest advantage on top of all the other advantages that they have. Ohio State, in a way, does too. And honestly, playing that first round game builds some momentum. I trust a lot of pieces that Oregon has more, but when both of these teams are at their best, I think Ohio State is better. I think their secondary is going to play better. I think they're going to get better pass rush. And while they're not going to be able to stop this rushing attack, they're not going to stop Dillon Gabriel. I think 1 or 2 sacks here and there. I think you got to get at least 2, maybe even 3 in this game, as well as slowing down this run game as best as you can, as well as on top of the fact that Jack Sawyer's playing with his hair on fire. This defense looked really good against Tennessee. I think we're going to get that same version of the Buckeyes that we got against Tennessee in this game against Oregon. I know, very scary thing to sort of bank on, and I just think that when these two teams are playing at their best, Ohio State is better. They are, on paper, the more talented team. Now, football is not played on paper. I just think Ohio State has much more to prove here. Oregon, yes, they want to go out and win their first national championship, and they want to get some of the guys that keep getting on their back about, oh, you still got no national titles, things like that, off of them. But Ohio State is playing with their hair on fire. They have built the momentum, and the mentality this entire postseason has been, we got 3 more games, not just 1. They're not taking this game by game. They're expecting to play all 4 phases of the college football playoff. I think Ohio State comes out. They start fast. Oregon's going to be able to answer. I see another back and forth game, but I think Ohio State's going to pull this one out. I can't tell you how, but some way, somehow, Ohio State will pull this thing out. Even though I trust Oregon more, I'm going to go with my gut, and I think the Buckeyes are going to pull this one off and win the Rose Bowl against Oregon, handing Oregon that vengeful loss from earlier in the season, and the Buckeyes will move on in the college football playoff. This is going to be an exciting game. This is probably the most thrilling game that we might see during the college football playoff, at the very least, during the quarterfinal round. I want to know what you guys think about it in the comment section down below. A little bit of a longer video. There was a lot to break down from this game. We got one more game to preview predict. It's Notre Dame, Georgia. See all of you in that next video. And remember to play hard but tailgate harder. We got one more to predict. See all you then. Goodbye.